Hello, future designers and developers. We have just finished coding our HTML to create this tip calculator. The next thing that we're going to be doing, we are going to create a function that is going to allow us to set a tip percentage, which you can see that if I click on 10%, it selects 10, goes over to 15, 20, 25. So we can select those, go back and forth, and change the values that we have there. So that's what we're going to be doing inside of this. So inside of the CSS, we do want to have a class that we can tell whether or not one of these is active. So let's do exactly that. Let's create a class called active. And we're going to make this really simple. We're just going to say that the color is red. So that's going to allow us, if we click on this, it's going to change over to red. Just save this so I don't keep on getting those pop-ups. Cool. All right, that's all that we needed to do inside of the CSS so that we can get started with some of our JavaScript. So what we are going to be doing first off is to actually get this area. That is going to be important for us just because this is where we're going to be adding our event listener, because we don't want to add an event listener to each and every one of these buttons. We want to be able to choose which button we're selecting. So let's go over here and we're going to call out const, and what we are calling out is the container that holds these three over here. So if we look, we've got this div class tip buttons. So inside of my JavaScript, I am going to call out this as tip button container. And that is going to be equal to my document dot get, or no, not, we're just going to use query selector. So query selector, and we are looking to grab out tip buttons. Let me move this over so we can have as much on one line as possible. Cool. All right, so now we've got this container on lock that if we click inside of here, we're going to be able to actually select it. We've got this button over here. So let's add an event listener to it. So we are going to grab our tip button container, save real quick, and we are going to say, did I spell that wrong? Tip button container. Cool. Add event listener. Cool. The event that we're looking for is a click. And when we do that, we are going to run the function setTip. Cannot read properties of add event listener. Oh, query selector is not working because we forgot to put a period. Maybe you didn't, but I did. Because that is going to be our class right there, and we are looking for the tip button container. I don't know if I'm misspelling something right here. But yeah, add event listener. Cool. All right, that error code has gone away. All right. Let's see if it worked, if we actually selected this. I'm just going to do tip button container. Oh my gosh, it has been a day. And I'm going to do dot style dot background is equal to red, just to see if we get some stuff that pops up. Oh, it's not going to let me do this because setTip is not defined. So let's actually call that out first. We're going to do function setTip. Takes no parameters at the moment. There we go. All right, it's popping up red. We did define it correctly. Cool. All right, so just to review what we just did right there. So this, we grabbed the HTML container that holds our tip buttons. Then we went over here and we added event listener to tip button container. And now what we're going to do, we are going to define what happens when we click on the tip button. Cool. All right, so it is going to take an argument of event because we are going to be choosing this different event. There's going to be different events that happen regardless of whether or not we click on, or depending on whether or not we click on which one of these. So we're going to have an event, and I'll show you why we need that in a second. But first, we are going to have a variable that we're going to use later. This is just setting the tip. We are going to need to have that tip available to us so that we can make other changes to the tip in other functions. So we're going to make a global function, and that function is going to be let. We're going to call it tip amount. So that is going to be our tip amount. Actually, no, because amount might be more of the end goal. We're going to do tip percent. All right, so let tip percent. So we have that declared outside of our function, so we can still use it inside of our function, but we can also use it in other functions as well. That's why it's a global variable. Cool. All right, so what we're going to be doing inside of this function, first off, we are going to get an array of all of our buttons. So that's going to be important because we're going to need to be able to click on each of these and determine what happens when we click on each of them. Then the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to set the tip depending on which button. Inside of that, we are also going to toggle the active class. So we're going to do two things inside of an if statement. So let's start by getting an array of all of our buttons. So in order to do that, we're going to say constant, and we're going to call this tip buttons with an S. We're going to say that is equal to our document dot get elements by class name. So if we go into our HTML, you can see we gave all of these a class name of tip amount. All of them have tip amount. So we can grab all of them with that class. So we're going to say tip amount. We don't need the period because we're getting it by class name, and you can see it's grabbing all of them because of elements. So we've got all of our elements inside of an array that we are calling tip buttons. Cool. All right. So now that we have that, let's go over and let's say what happens if we select each of these. So I'm going to start with a kind of cookie cutter if statement. So I'm going to say if, we're going to have our condition in here, and we're going to have our condition be if our button is selected. So we're going to say selected, if selected, dot class list dot contains, and the class that we're looking for it to contain is our first button, tip 10. Go over here, tip 10. Then we want a certain thing to happen. Let's say we want to console log 10. So there's our little bit of code right now, but first we need to define what selected is, and that's where this event comes in. So at the very start over here, we are going to identify which button we selected. So we're going to call out a new variable. We're going to say constant. This is named selected. And selected is going to be equal to whatever our event, which is our argument, whatever we clicked on, dot targets. So whatever it targets. So we're just going to say our event target. All right. So constant is selected whatever we target with our event. Our event is our click. So when we click on it, whatever we clicked on, if it has this class of 10, we're going to log 10. So that right now should be this. If we click on this, we should get a console log of 10. Let's see, what is our error? Class list contains, because I spelled contains wrong. All right, there we go. Now I'm clicking on this. We should be getting 10 inside of our console log. We are. Look at that. Oh, we're getting a lot of errors too, but I fixed all those. So let's clear it. Let's just see. If I click on here, we get 10. Perfect. Perfect. Now, we don't want this to actually console log 10. What we do want it to happen, I'm going to actually leave that on there for a second. We're going to console log 10. But what we want is we want to actually set our tip percentage to be 10%. So we are going to say that our tip percentage right here that we already declared as let, tip percent is equal to 0.1. 0.1, because remember it's 10%, so it's 0.1. This percentage is cool. All right, so we're going to do that, and we're also going to set this to active. So we are going to say that our selected dot class list dot toggle, because we want to toggle active. Cool. All right, so now if I click on this, changes the color to red, and we get that console log of 10. Cool. All right. Ooh, why did it? I don't know what I just selected there. It's all highlighted. I don't know what happened to students. There we go, it's back. All right, so this is our cookie cutter statement. We're going to just copy and paste this for each of our amounts. But there is going to be an issue with this, and we'll get to that in a second. So we've got if selected class list contains tip 10, we have a tip percentage of 1, we're going to console log active, or we're going to set it to active, and then we're going to set this to 10. We're going to console log 10. So let's change this out for 15 on our second one. Tip percentage should be 0.15. We're going to toggle the class of active, and we're going to console log 15. Last one over here is 20, and I did not mean to say last one. We set that all to 20, and then tip percentage 25, console log 25. All right, so now what we are going to do is we're going to go over to our console and we're going to see what happens. So I'm going to clear this out. When I click on 10, I get console log 10. My tip percentage has been set to 10. When I console log 15, or I click on 15, it's now red, 15, 20, red, 20, 25, red, 25. All right, you see this? They're all red now. And I can click and they toggle off, which is cool, but I don't want 10 active, 15 active, 20 active, and 25 active. I can't tell which one was the last one I clicked, which one am I actually going to use inside of my function. So we want to be able to remove the active class with all of these. And yes, we can call out them individually, and we can write this really long if statement that each of these have tons of things that's happening in there. Or we can set it every single time that this function runs, the very first thing that it does, before or as soon as we click on it, it is going to take all of our buttons and it's going to remove the class of active if it's there. So we're going to do that with a for loop. This is our first time using a for loop. Actually, never mind, we used it in our focus timer. We're going to use this again, which is pretty cool. Unless we didn't use it in our focus timer. I don't know if we did in our focus timer. Now that I think of it, I don't think we did. So let's do that right over here, and this is going to be the last thing that we do inside of this function. So we're going to leave it after we select our target, and it'll be fine, doesn't matter. But what we're going to do, we're going to create a for loop. So we're going to say for, and then it's got a condition for how long that it runs for. So we're going to declare a new variable, and we're going to say let I. This is kind of the standard for loops. We use a variable I, and this is kind of the iteration. Remember, iterations, that happens once, twice, 3, 4 iterations, 5 iterations. So this is going to happen every single time that we have a certain, or for each button that we have. So we're going to select for let I, that's our new variable. We're going to start at 0 because that's going to be our first number in our index. if we index our list of all of our buttons, which we got, oh, we got it right over here. So we actually need this before our for loop. So we're gonna cut that, throw that before our for loop. Cool, so now we got this for loop. Let is equal to I, which is 1, or well 0. And then what we're going to do is we're going to define the length in which that we will actually have this going on. So while I is less than our tip bins, So we're going to say tip buttons dot length. So tip buttons dot length. So if we added another button, we'd do it over here too. We could have said 4 if we really wanted, since we only have 4, but that's fine. And then we are going to define its step. I forgot this needs to be a semicolon. Its step is going to be I++. So just to explain it, we're starting with an iteration of 0. So we're starting at our very first button, an index of 0. Then we are iterating for as many buttons as we have, which we've all contained inside of this right over here. And then after we do this once, we are going to move on to the next button just by stepping up once. So that's our for loop. Cool. And we would have gotten some practice in class with this, but we've got our for loop over here, and every single time we want to grab our tip button, and we're going to throw in our variable of I right here. So on the very first one, I is equal to 0, so it's tip button 0. On the next one, tip button 1. Next button, tip button 2. Tip button 3. And that would cover all 4 of them because we're going 0, 1, 2, 3. Cool. So tip button, whichever one it is, and we're going to say dot class list, and then we're going to say dot remove active. Cool. So as soon as we click on a button, it's going to remove all of the active classes from all of our buttons. Let's see if it worked. Go clear this. Did not. Oh, tip button, tip buttons. There we go. Cool. All right, now if we click on 10, we got 10, it's red. If we go to 15, 15 is now red and 10 is off. The reason for that, why 15 is not off, is because we're going to remove them first, and then inside of here we will add the active class. But now we can go through and we can set all of these to whatever value they need to be. All right, that is it for this tutorial. We're already at 17 minutes. Holy cow. All right, thank you for watching. I'll talk to you later.